Welcome to the Roniel and DaRon podcast show. I'm DaRon.
And I'm Roniel.
In today's segment, I'd like to see if we can't talk about some of the differences in corporate security versus being a contractor versus being a consultant. Now, when we talk contractors, I want to make it clear what we're talking about is not what a lot of people outside of the government realm, for example, think of. We're not talking about where you are hired by a temp firm or anything like that. What we're really talking about is an organization or entity that is paid to go through as a company. So you're full time for this other company and you are operating on behalf of or providing some service to another organization.
I've been in both roles. Haven't really been in the contractor role, so I'll leverage you for that. But both roles, whether it's corporate security and consulting, are totally different, especially coming from a corporate security or information security to a consultant role. Just totally different. But we also didn't really know the difference between it and how many different areas it was at the time. So it's not like most people think when you think consultant, you would think, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to be one of those AppSec engineers or infrastructure engineers, security engineers, actually setting up or building secure infrastructure or secure code guidelines and stuff like that. So, I didn't know that it had more than just that. So it's like this whole ecosystem that you don't even really know about, especially when it comes to both sides, right?
Right.
So your corporate security, as you may know, is, more in a corporate environment, not really a consultant, more internal. And that can insist in infrastructure, security engineering, network security engineering, all sorts of security engineering. And then you have your analyst roles. You have your penetration testers that you may have internally. You have those. You have your security administrators. You have a whole different ecosystem of different security teams. The weird part that gets weird about it is then you'll have your information security team, which is basically separated from the rest. And you have your AppSec or application security team.
Right.
You have your infrastructure security team. And you have all these different security teams that are supposed to be combined into one, like I would see in most of the corporate environments. Then when you go over to consulting, it's a similar thing, but you're not internal. You basically are giving your services. You like security as a service, basically.
Right.
And you're basically dealing with different clients, but you're a company separated from a corporate environment that is actually dealing with different clients and selling your service, whether it's penetration testing, more likely security assessments, infrastructure security, application security, all of that. So basically you're basically on your own. You're like, I consider consulting as being more of a entrepreneurship in a way, but not where you can set and pick the clients and the projects that you're interested in and that you want to work with, depending on where you work at in that realm or security. And you have more freedom than you would have in a corporate environment. You don't have much freedom. You kind of you get what you get.
Right.
So
the tasking's very different.
Oh yeah.
So what I've generally seen is, at least from the government side of things in general, which is usually where I've played, your corporate IT was considerably less funded and didn't perform as well. It seemed to, in general, have significantly less skilled employees and less passionate. And that could be for a variety of reasons, to include just getting beaten down. But out of curiosity, number one, how has your experience been in that regard? And number two, which do you think is more attractive to individuals, or more likely to attract individuals who are more in it for the money than they are in it for the passion and thrill of doing things and breaking stuff?
So the most attractive, just get to the point. The most attractive is the consulting area, and it could be the contracting. But I'm going to speak from my experience being a consultant area right now. The corporate security is not that attractive, but it's attractive for people just getting out of school. Because when I used to think about it, consulting was a little scary. Even contracting was a little scary. So, having to hold your own and talk to different clients and
Right.
work on different projects is a little scarier. But as you're over on the corporate side, you kind of around a selective amount, selective group of people,
Right.
and you can gain that experience with those selective group of people if they're experienced at all. And then, as you see in that space, there's not a lot of experienced individuals either. So normally, I would rate that for people coming out of school, they would usually go into an internal corporate security type job, which is what I've seen, especially since they do a lot more internships than I've seen in the consulting space.
Right.
So you get those people coming out of college or those individuals coming out of college to go and work for some place like Progressive or so on that does security. You get to get those inexperienced people, build them up, and hopefully they will
you're frozen again.
be what you expect them to be. Really good security professionals. But it doesn't always turn out to be that way because you don't have they can't retain those security professionals with those high skill levels, which most of those go to the contracting or the consulting area where they can actually hone their skills or hone into the specialization and work on projects that are meaningful to them than working in internal. Also, you get more funding, more budget to do those things in those spaces than you would in a corporate space, which I experienced less funding and hassle to actually get funding because it's like getting a budget is like pulling teeth. Like you're not going to get none of that in the corporate space. You're going to have to always battle back and forth with, upper management or, those corporate entities because they don't actually put security first when they should. It should be first. It should be baked in to everything before you even start thinking about building anything. You should always be thinking about security first.
Well,
So
I think there's a lot of irony in that because a lot of what you see is it's these organizations that supposedly are pushing security on their clients or suggesting security to their clients, but they tend to be bad themselves. We could go through and discuss concrete examples, but I'm not in the mood for getting sued right now.
I don't think anybody wants to. Not at all.
But it is funny because some of these are huge names. And you'll see the same thing like actually, so let's talk SolarWinds. I can talk about that. Theirs is well published. There's nothing they can say. SolarWinds pushes security, right? That's one of the big things that they press on everyone else is building secure environments and keeping secure networks and all this other stuff. But they got compromised. They got compromised hard, and it was mostly due to negligence and mistakes that should never be made and should be caught quickly and easily. It's just there's a lot of irony in this happening from a company that does a lot of contracting and consulting on security.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you talk about and just think about it, no company, nobody or individual are 100% secure.
Right.
So when you talk about being compromised, do you think it's the way that they're compromised that makes it bad, or this is just being compromised in general? Because it seems like every company, whether they're big or small, are being compromised in some point in time.
That's a great question. I think a lot of it comes down to why they got compromised slash how, coupled with then how they react. Right. So what did SolarWinds? One of the first things that SolarWinds did after their big compromise was they looked around for who to blame. So who did they seek out? They actually went after and first they blamed Bitbucket or whomever they were using for their.
Was it Bitbucket or GitHub? I think it was
one
GitHub.
or the other. Yeah. Whichever one it was that they happened to be using. And then they went after JetBrains. which makes an IDE. And for those of you who don't know, that's used by developers. Yeah, I don't know if you heard that. They tried claiming,
Yeah,
oh, well,
no.
it couldn't have been us. It must have been JetBrains. It must have been through JetBrains, which was ridiculous because it had nothing to do with either of them. It was all SolarWinds.
So they didn't think to blame themselves first. Like you, obviously, you guys have to be the problem, and then you have to get really deep down into the problem of how good is your security posture.
Right.
You know, so you really got to take a good look and analyze that whole ecosystem to see where your issues are. So to blame it on other people, meaning that they probably knew that there is an issue there, but that they didn't want to blame it on themselves because look, they would lose clients anyway if they said,
Right.
"Oh yeah, we were just foolish and we did not really, check things that we were supposed to have checked and supposed to be done internally, and we wasn't doing our job. So we're gonna just blame it on other people that totally don't make sense."
Yeah.
And we're just gonna blame it on them, even though they're the framework that you put all your stuff. They didn't tell you to put it there. You did.
Right.
You need to know that whatever you're putting out there should be checked before it's pushed out to the public.
Well, and to that point, a lot of people sat there and acted like it was so sophisticated. Ooh, that still burns me up to this day. They acted like what happened to SolarWinds was so sophisticated. There was nothing sophisticated about it. I mean, you've done a lot of assessments. And how common is it to find credentials just sitting out in the open?
Oh, it is very common. I mean, even let's say, even when I was working at IBM before, I'm not saying in Pacific, but when I was working there, we would always have to tell developers, or whether it was DevOps or anybody, make sure that you do not put your credentials in your code, because nobody knew any other way to store that, maybe until we had the vault that they were used for. I think what it's used for Ansible. Ansible has a vault. They would use for their scripts, or there were other tools you can use to like keychain or different stuff that was stored, or keyring, depending on what language you're using, that was stored in a secure database. So you'd always have to tell them, don't do that. But you would see it time and time again, whether it doesn't matter who it is, that people would store that data, store it into whether it's Bitbucket, and it doesn't matter if it's private or public. Right. If you're doing an internal assessment, somebody internally is going to be able to see the history, right, or see the data that's in that Bitbucket, repository. If it's public, then it's all crazy because everybody now sees it, and you're still storing that data. So you see it time and time again, even though it's it should be second nature. It is. So number one rule, I don't know if it's even number one. It may be a different number on that list as far as the security Bible, but you definitely should not store credentials in code or your repo, any of that. That is the number one thing an attacker is going to do when they're trying to search on you, is see your repository. That's number one now. See if there's API keys, there are credentials, FTP credentials maybe hidden somewhere in some scripts. It doesn't matter. Network credentials, SMTP credentials, all those things are going to be golden, and they're low-hanging fruit. They're the easiest thing to target.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And people will sit there and they'll hard code credentials, which is great, especially because going back to it, so if you're using Bitbucket, if you're using GitHub, if you're using anything like that, or if you're using Subversion or CVS, anything, right? Anyone who gets access to that system can see those credentials in your source code. And people have been going through and trolling through all of these public source code repositories for well over a decade and a half. Linux has had their kernel and has had a whole slew of different open source projects compromised many, many times by people attacking their repos. And it's just that someone would go through and claim that there was anything sophisticated about what was going on is ridiculous, especially because once you get credentials, you could put anything you want in the code, or if you're talking about an automated build pipeline, which is what they had, you add it straight to the executables. I find it ridiculous that anyone would call anything that was involved in the SolarWinds incident sophisticated.
Well, we talked about this on the malware episode, where none of it is that sophisticated. It is really simple to write malware. The I guess the sophistication that blinds people is when they see the random junk functions that go out there, and it makes it so sophisticated. But no, dummies, it is actually them trying to fool you into looking at other things and actually looking at the big picture.
Right.
It's really not hard to write malware. It's not. You don't have to be a rocket science to write malware. And depending on what your objective and goal is. But the SolarWinds thing was not sophisticated. When people were talking, oh man, this is the most sophisticated. No, it's not. It's like saying the Black Kingdom ransomware was the most sophisticated when it was poorly written.
Right.
Okay. All right. It was nothing sophisticated about that. Like, it's poorly written, but it doesn't matter when it comes to malware. You don't have to be the top developer. You just need to know what the hell you want to do and tell the computer what you want it to do. It doesn't have to be the greatest code. It does not have to have some peer review to figure out whether this is really written right or is it optimal for it. It does not. Who gives a Only thing that matters is that it does its job.
Right. And people go, oh, well, but it sat there and gathered intelligence about its environment and did that first before they dropped a bunch of stuff down on the victim. But
it's been happening for years.
That's been happening forever. Yeah, there's nothing. This wasn't top tier stuff. Well, and similar to that, I think a lot of the confusion comes from the fact that, well, I would tell you a lot of it's just to grab headlines, but headlines and fame aside, I think what adds to the confusion is a lot of people are used to penetration tests that are run in a very short time frame. And so you as a penetration tester have to be noisy. The reason why you have to be noisy is because you've got to get it done. You can't spend 3 months on an engagement. You can't spend even a month on an engagement. You get 2 weeks usually. 1 to 2 weeks.
But that's why I argue about penetration testing not being as realistic as you would want it to be. You would want to go for a red team engagement. Now, I don't know how the realism is actually still there or not for a red team engagement, but a penetration test is not as realistic as you think. To me, if you ask me, it's like, I don't even want to say it's actual an attack. It's more like I said before. You go, you run some type of scanner, you find a vulnerability, you test if it's vulnerable or not, and then you list it on the report. Now, again, I'm not going to say we have a difference between vulnerability assessments and penetration testing. But if you really think about penetration testing today, what is it? Somebody running a scanner, taking those, seeing if it's false or positive. All right. And then exploiting it, putting it on a report.
Right.
All right. What would you call that? You can almost maybe see it as an auditor.
Yes. It's just a dynamic audit where they actually try testing some things.
Yeah. And that's the way I look at it nowadays. Now, if you wanted something that was true to life or a real life scenario, then you would pick a red team engagement, right? But even then, those don't always be as real, like true to life. All right. It's almost like I'm looking at a movie.
Right.
All right. In a way, somebody's going in and physically hacking into the building, and then they're getting into the building and somehow social engineering somebody to get through the door. And then they get to the door, get to the switch closet, and then somehow they plug in and then they hacking away and whatever they want to do, or they give somebody a rubber ducky and all right, like that is cool crap. But is that really happening today? Have you seen that happen? Which is some of the terms that we were talking about that we can't talk about, of course, with IoT systems. Like a lot of this stuff is not happening in real life. It's a good attack, don't get me wrong, but how much time do I want to spend on that? And how much time is this? How much is this attack actually being done in the real world? So I kind of look at that and say, do I want to spend my time on that when you're probably never going to get, if we're talking about IoT, some voltage glitching or some side channel attack happening to those IoT systems? Who's going to spend that much time on that?
Right. Yeah. Other than nation states, and that's another piece to this is you have to understand and always ask yourself, well, who am I protecting against? And that's where I think a lot of people go really wrong. And then they invest a lot of money, time, resources, manpower into silly stuff. If you are doing manufacturing and you have plants in China, first and foremost, before anything actually arrives at your destination, I guarantee the Chinese have gotten their hands on it and they probably have reverse engineered it if they can, or they've at least done some basal analysis, try to figure out whatever they can. At that point, you have to ask yourself, what is the point in trying to protect my US based assets from the Chinese if I'm doing all my manufacturing in China? Well, what secret am I going to be hiding from them? What is left?
Yeah, there's not much. Like they already know everything, or know as much as you gave them.
Right. By doing that manufacturing over there, you already gave it to you. It's like going through. If I sat there and I said, "All right, Roniel, I've got a secret, and I'm going to stick it in your backyard. Now you control your backyard. You control what goes in. You control what goes out. At any point, you could go through and decide to just check on what all's in your backyard." And I said, "But, Roniel, don't violate my privacy and go check this out." I mean,
is it written on a piece of paper?
No, because what agreement could I have? You're the government of Roniel.
Right. But is it in my wallet? And does it have aluminum foil? Is it in aluminum foil?
Yeah.
You get what I'm going at. Yes. Right. Yeah, no, that would be totally stupid. Like if I'm already giving you the keys to the kingdom or you giving me the secret, then I mean, who's to say that I'm not going to look at it? You can tell me all day, but it's in my vicinity, so I'm already going to see it.
Right.
So it's pretty stupid. Like the way things are going now, it's like everybody's looking for the next best headline, or they're looking to get some type of stardom off of writing these articles. How many articles have you seen, especially about SolarWinds, that people were describing the attack and acting as if it was the most sophisticated thing ever?
Or even
I'm like, are you serious? Right. It's not a new technique. Like we talked about people coming up with like something that, so again, what was it? HTTP request splitting. Right. We talked about that before. And then all of a sudden you come up with HTTP request smuggling. Okay. All right. So you took a technique that was already out there, maybe, or a vulnerability that was already a thing. Maybe you added a few different techniques that were different from that vulnerability. Then you name it something new. It's not new. Right. It's the same goddamn thing. Maybe you added a few techniques that were not there. Why not call it a technique than to call it something new vulnerability?
Well, but the joke is those techniques already existed. All you're doing is cobbling together a few different things. That would be like going through and saying, okay, well, I didn't run SQL injection because I encoded my SQL payload. Now it's going to be encoded injection. I mean, what the hell? That's what they're doing. That's actually how this is working today. I mean, they sit there and they've got like server-side request forgery. How many times can we rename the same silly thing? How many times? And act like it's a new thing every time. I swear, people's memory is very short, or these attention seekers who are just in it for the headlines and power are just that good at pulling the wool over the eyes of the masses, and nobody else speaks out against it. And then they wind up just taking how many we went from IT security. Now the DoD came out with information security, and then they started doing they also had information assurance, which the DoD shifted over to. And then you started with this whole cyber thing. Everything cyber this, cyber that. I mean, now they've got cyber hygiene and cyber attack chain. Oh, this is ridiculous. What are we going to have? Cyber teeth? I've got cyber teeth.
Yeah.
Check those. You better wash those cyber teeth. Better floss your cyber gums.
Your cyber hygiene of your cyber teeth.
That's right. I mean, it's ridiculous stuff. Why do we keep doing? And all of this is marketing terms. Advanced persistent threat. You know what? Those aren't new. Those weren't new when that term came out. And it was actually not invented by the Air Force because some colonel wanted to go through and do all this stuff. It was a marketing term created by Mandiant. Mandiant made the term. There was all of these fictitious stories that came out about its creation are just completely, utterly bogus. It was a marketing term and nothing else to differentiate their proposal and their work so that they could get more work from the federal government. And it worked. Except now everyone's taken up the term advanced persistent threat, APT. And they're all trying to name all this stuff. Well, this is, Cozy Bear. This is Huggy Bear. This is Frosted Flakes.
Wait. None of you talking about that. Where does the terms come from? Like, I am trying to understand where some of these names are coming from. I don't get it. How do so when I'm analyzing some malware, just analyzing, I don't think of, I'm gonna call this Easy Bear.
Yeah.
I'm gonna call this Evaderism.
Yeah.
I'm gonna call it that. How do you come up with the name? That's what I'm saying. And then the names are cheesy.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not. Wow. Yeah, that was a really, really good one. What's the other one? There's another one. Oh no, I got it. Shell shock.
Yeah.
My show got shocked the hell out of it, by the way. Oh.
It just reminds me of the IO game Shell Shockers, where you're running around as an egg shooting each other.
I thought it was a comic book superhero. Shell shock. That's my power. I shock shells for a living.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And it's all these people, and they're trying to get headlines, so they're going to name everything. And, well, newspapers aren't going to sell based off the name OpenSSL sucks.
Yeah.
So what are they going to do? They've got to come up with the catch. It's kind of like what you see with the military. The military does this all the time. You're going to name all of your operations: Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Thunderbolt, Operation Athena's Sword, Operation. I mean, all of these operations are just ridiculous. And they do it because they know that way it's going to get attention, and that's what they're after. And they do the same thing with the names of all this malware and these vulnerabilities. And it's just so ludicrous, which goes to why they keep needing to rename things. Because eventually IT security and information security no longer sounds hip. Because that's what people said 20, 30 years ago. And actually in the internet age, that's what people said 5 years ago. So now we're going to rename it. I'm surprised they haven't renamed digital forensics yet. I'm waiting for that to happen. I mean, they sort of did, because now they do the whole DFIR and stuff like that. But
so why don't they call it digital assurance?
Yeah, they should. They should.
DA.
Well, and actually, now that I think about it, they are trying somewhat with this whole threat hunting and all this other bogus stuff they keep saying.
Wait a minute. So I've seen this trend. So you can speak from this because you actually are in this area. So I've seen this trend where digital forensics, of course, incident response are all grouped together, but also threat hunting is grouped with that. What does threat hunting have to do with digital forensics? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure that you're looking for a threat actor, but I was a threat hunter, and that had nothing, not a thing to do with digital forensics.
No, it's completely separate. Absolutely, totally separate. And really, what it winds up being is more trend analysis than anything. And let's be honest, reading logs, right?
All day. The most boringest thing ever. If you want, don't get me wrong, there's some good things in the infrastructure security area space. But if you want to be bored out of your freaking mind,
Yeah.
go that route.
Yeah.
You will literally love logs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I'm telling you, I think a lot of that is because they want to try to make our arena sound sexy so you can dupe people into going after those jobs. You know, you'll be naive enough to sit there and say, "Oh, well, I'm a threat hunter. I'm an incident response expert." Whatever it happens to be. So what do? You run off and you get a job in that. And then you find out literally all you do all day long is read ridiculous logs until you get what's called log blindness, which is a real thing. And then what good are you to anyone?
Yeah, you're no good. No good at all. I literally, like, I was a zombie staring at those logs. But I will say it does teach you some things if you are just starting out, especially when it comes to system administration or even security administration. You got to know what you're looking at, especially when you're looking at logs. You got to know the net, the source and destinations to also kind of get you an idea of how packets are sent over.
Right.
I'm not going to say exactly, but you kind of see how they're going back and forth. But it also helps you debug because it's not like being a programmer. You're looking at, compile like an IDE and then compiling your code and trying to figure it out. You actually debug things through your log. So you kind of can figure out a lot of different things in there, but it does help. But it doesn't mean that it's the best job to do.
Right.
It's not the most interesting job. Which is why people are going the route of consulting, which brings me to a term that I would like to ask you about is why such of a change from penetration tester to consultant? Like, why did they change it? Did it make it worse or did it make it better? Or did it make it not any better than either one? I mean, so I don't know how better it did or how more efficient that name is.
Right. So it's interesting because if you actually watch the trends carefully, you'll notice a couple of really important things. First and foremost, a lot of these terms that don't make sense are coming straight out of government contracting, especially military contracting, especially coming from either Booz Allen Hamilton or small companies that are trying to edge their way in. For example, Mandiant back in early 2000s. And what they're going through and doing is, so consultant. Consultant is something that Booz Allen always did. And in fact, I was a consultant level 2, which is a senior consultant, something like that. Yeah, because next was associate, then it's senior associate. But the way that worked was Booz Allen sat there and they had it as a rank. Because you had consultant, which was a level 1, then you had senior consultant, and so on and so forth. And Booz Allen's big thing was, well, we're consultants, we're not contractors. And you would ask yourself, well, what the hell is a consultant? And the simple, easy answer is a consultant is a contractor in denial.
Wait, a consultant is a contractor in denial, so he doesn't want to be a contractor, so he calls himself a consultant to make himself feel better about not being.
And so he feels better is exactly right. You charge more, and you feel, it's a big title thing. And that's exactly what you've seen in our industry is you'll notice the titles keep getting longer and longer for everyone, right? The more words you tack onto it, the more important you seem. That's why you've got, so it used to be just you had vice presidents and only vice presidents. Then they started doing senior vice presidents, associate vice presidents, senior associate vice president. And it gets longer and longer and longer. And that's what you see. So we've also seen at the same time this transition to things like, well, your penetration testers are now security consultants. They're considered security consultants because I'll tell you what the real difference between a contractor and a consultant is supposed to be. And then I'm going to tell you it's bunk. A contractor is someone who's supposed to be doing. A consultant is supposed to be someone who's telling you how to do it, but they aren't necessarily implementing. So contractors are your ground pounders actually implementing, but they don't usually architect and tell you how to do it. Whereas your consultants are actually doing that high level architecting, engineering, development kind of deal. But they aren't supposed to actually implement. Now, the truth is, as much as Booz Allen likes to play that they're consultants, not contractors, Booz Allen has always both architected and implemented. And what you see is all of these people, they shifted over and they said, well, okay, I'm a penetration tester. Well, that doesn't sound as fancy. Now I'm a security consultant. I'm a penetration testing consultant, or stuff like that. Because what they're trying to do is, number one, they want to make their title longer. But number two, they're trying to signal that, oh, well, I'm a consultant, so you've got to pay me a lot of money because I'm so smart. For whatever reason, consultants are seen. Which do you assume has more education, more skill, and all of that good stuff? The architect designing everything, or the builder putting it all together?
The architect.
The architect. And that's exactly why consultant is in favor, because everyone immediately just assumes, well, if I'm a consultant, I'm the one making it all, whereas your contractor is just the lowly peon who's actually doing the work. And you could have had anyone do that because I made such brilliant plans. And of course, anyone who's done the work knows that's simply not the case. It's not how this works.
If that's the case, then that's the same way. Is that the same way when you look at software engineers versus computer programmers and, or developers?
Yeah.
And then you also have that rank to go down. Or if we say, what else? There's another one, but just say analyst versus engineer. Like, so yeah, or or electrical engineers and technicians,
Right.
like the technician. And I never understood this. This is what bothered me the most. You have the technicians who are actually building the schematics, building all of the stuff that you design as an engineer, but the engineer gets paid more than the technician. It doesn't make sense. But they say also the engineer could do it himself. Then if he could do it himself, then why isn't he tasked to do both? Why is there a technician when you need it? I think of a technician as somebody repairing and not just building.
Right.
And an engineer is somebody that's actually building and not just not repairing, but building and designing, then actually giving it off to a technician to build it and also repair whatever issues that come in.
Right. See, and that's actually one of the interesting things is you've got this word game going on throughout all of this, right? I'll tell you what the justification is. The justification is, yes, your engineer could, just like your consultant could, right? That's what they tell you. But you're cheaper because you don't have the strategy and knowledge and experience that this engineer or architect or consultant has. And it would be a waste to have them doing this because I can have you do it for less. It's really actually just a game. It's a game done by employers to pay people less. And there is some merit behind the ideology that a good engineer, a good architect, a good senior level person, and I mean really good, it would be obviously a waste of their talent if you have other work for them to be doing. But in a lot of cases, what other work are they going to do?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's all politics, right?
It's all politics, and people will argue, well, so and so did their time, but did they?
If you ask me, it seemed like they were just making up shit. Like, as they went, oh, we're going to give you what? Next thing you know, it's Dev 7,
Yeah.
Dev 8, Dev 10. I mean, are we talking about some Dragon Ball Z power level shit? Like, next thing you know, I'm a Super Saiyan 10, 20. Like, oh, I am like the rose gold. I'm gold dust Super Saiyan. Like, okay, like I've just upgraded to that. I mean, there's just you're making up now. Like, there's no such thing, and I have not seen some of this even on a corporate level from other places. So now you're just making up. Just say it, just to give people, to make them feel like they belong, just to give them something else to look forward to. You know?
Well, that all goes to what you and I both had a lot of confusion over, and clearly so did this company. Team lead versus technical lead. And they could not make up their mind. In fact, they sat there and they said that at first we were just technical leads. And then they started calling us team leads and saying we weren't technical leads. And then they called us both. But at the same time, they didn't want to give us the management power that should come with that. Mostly because there were a few individuals on that team they had issues that need to be dealt with, but the company didn't want to deal with it for one reason or another.
They were giving people title. They were just giving people titles like Oprah was giving people stuff on that one show, on her Oprah show. Like, you get a title, you get a title, you get a level 2, you get a level 3. Like, level 2. I mean, as we speak, and I'm not going to say no names because this person know who they are, but person to get a level 2 that never hacked a day in their life, don't even know what it looks like, didn't even get a fucking computer science degree, doesn't know nothing, had 1 year of development experience before he got there. Then all of a sudden he's a hacker. All right, he gets on there and starts testing, can't really test by himself, can't even explain remediation thoughts, but he's a level 2. He can't explain to a client about how to remediate a vulnerability. He doesn't understand the simplest of vulnerabilities like deserialization and more. I didn't think they all understand it, but for that person to get a level 2 title, it's just a smack in the face for people that actually put their time in, literally have been doing this for years, literally have been researching and busting their butt off to get where they are, for somebody with no experience to come and get a level 2. So they were just throwing out there just because.
Well, one of the hiring practices that they had was they went through most organizations. If you want to go through and you build up your security program, one of the first things you do is you hire some of your high level, very knowledgeable staff, right? That way they can then hire people under them. But these guys did it opposite. They instead hired the low levels first and then tried to fill up the ranks. And what they did then is they had these low level guys who had no experience, and I mean no experience in security at all, period, run interviews. And these guys asked the most ridiculous questions, absolutely ridiculous questions. Like, they asked me about cross-site scripting, and I actually literally started laughing. I was laughing in this interview because I sat there and I said, I'm sorry, I'm laughing because you guys are asking me such easy questions. And honestly, buffer overflow, SQL injection, cross-site scripting. That's what they asked. Now, there was some question about the local address for IPv6, and I'm sitting there going, well, IPv4 is 127.0.0.1, and 6 is FF, blah, 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 blah. And I said, but I could be wrong about 6 because I've always learned there's no point in memorizing something that I don't need to memorize, and that's just something you don't come across. That usually, if you're doing local hosts, you're going to use IP version 4, because why would you do anything else? And you know
why
what?
would they ask a dumb question like that?
Yeah, why would you ask it? Right? Why? It's ridiculous, especially given that everyone knows a lot of those strings are so random. It's not like you're sitting there asking basic stuff like what's a block C, what's a block B, what's a block A, D. Even that's really irrelevant because what we were talking about was security. So if we're discussing security, then why does that make a difference? But now, if you ask what's a private address versus public or something, fine, okay. Although this was application security, I have to emphasize this. I didn't mention this.
That's what I was going to say. Like, what does this have to do with application security? Now, again, you have to have basic understanding of general knowledge as you should have when you're coming into this field. But the reason, and I'm just going to say for web apps, I'm not going to say the whole AppSec. It's easy because you don't have to know much about network. Okay, you can give two about a lot of that stuff, but
Right.
you just have to know the basic protocol that you should know,
Right.
Which makes it easier to get into. But when you start talking about it as a whole, like, it's a difference. But what the hell does that have to do with anything? That has nothing to do with none of that. You wasn't going to be one talking about being a senior or lead network engineer or an administrator or a network penetration tester. And where you should probably know those things. But even now today, you don't even have to know that to be a network penetration tester.
No.
Okay? Like, do anybody back in these days now actually like go through, actually figuring out subnets, like calculating those?
See,
no, you don't.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, I did that for like my CCNA, but that was 2000 2002 and 2003 that I was going through and doing all of that. Ever since that, I mean, you don't need that. Look, you know what the IP address block is for your organization or that you're supposed to be testing. That's all you need to know. You don't need to know anything else. You need to know, is this private or not, so you know if you need to be VPN'd in, and that's about it. Otherwise, you go hog wild. You don't need to know if it's local host. It's all, and you can look up an address. But again, 127.0.0.1 is the only one you need to know because that's the only one that matters, especially in the United States. We're still almost exclusively using IP version 4. It is still incredibly difficult to find an internet service provider, an ISP, that actually will give you IPv6, unless you're on a cellular network. It's very hard. Here in the United States, we're not Asia. We have so many addresses still, and everyone's like, well, it's almost out of addresses. No, it's not almost out of addresses. It's just a lot of them are reserved. And the government just keeps slowly unreserving them. But they kind of tried to stop that, hoping that people are going to switch over. But the United States was supposed to have switched over a decade and a half ago. And I remember when I was going for my CCNA, they were talking about IP version 6. And even then they sat there and said, yeah, we're not going to move to it anytime soon. The United States isn't going to. Asia already was moving in that direction. But the United States has no reason to. We control it. Why would we do anything else?
Yeah, and definitely, like I said, you will see a total difference between corporate security and that, or consulting and contracting, and it's weird. It's weird. But now, if we to talk about something in this area, in this space, when it comes to consulting, maybe even contracting and corporate security, I'm not sure how they make difference, but security assessment versus a penetration test versus a vulnerability assessment versus a risk assessment.
Right.
You have all those different things. And what I've noticed, even as a consulting, you'll see nowadays that the reason why, and this is funny, when we would get a penetration test report that we thought was a penetration test, it would not be a penetration test. And I had come to learn that most consulting places actually do security assessments than that of a penetration test. So be clear when you're looking at these things and asking that you are clear that whether it's a penetration test versus a security assessment, which are two different things. So that's the difference you're going to see in these areas, that a lot of the time they're moving towards more security assessments than a penetration test. Why? I have no clue.
Yeah,
but there should be.
Do you want to discuss the difference between the two real quickly for everyone?
Yeah, sure. With a security assessment, and this may be a little bit different areas, but just say for AppSec in general, we're going to pick a security assessment for a web app. You're doing a security assessment for a web app. you're pretty much just going. It's to me, I call it a checklist, like we had to deal with the other company.
Yeah.
A checklist of things. You're looking at a checklist of things to mark off for that particular client, that whether they're vulnerable or not. And that is as far as you go. You may document the response and the request and the response, and you don't go no further trying to you may exploit it, but you won't go any further for like post exploitation and none of that stuff to grab data, download sensitive data, none of that. Especially when you come to AppSec, which most people don't get in general, you're probably going to get dummy data.
Yeah.
So you're going to get a test user. You're not going to be doing it an assessment like you would do a network assessment where you're hacking live or testing live users, user account internal. And here you're going to probably have test accounts. Okay. So with that being said, there's no point in some cases, but then in some cases there might be a point. But for security assessments, you're just, to me, I call them checkoffs. You're just checking off each vulnerability, make sure you go through and look, and then you're giving that to the client or whatever you found, and that's it. You don't have to go as far as really doing any exploitation or post-exploitation at that. Penetration tests, however, you're not only, you may have a checklist of things that you may want to look at, but you're actually going to go through, exploit those things, and you're going to do some post exploitation and get all of the goodies and try to download them or get them to your attacker server, and then take notes on that and report it to the client. So you get to go a little further with exploitation and post exploitation attacks and different stuff. So you also can get, you'll probably be able to do web shells, different reverse shells, different things that you probably wouldn't be able to do, even if it's more of a live customer or test customer. You get to do those things because they want to see how good their infrastructure or their security posture is. So those are two different, if you ask me, from that perspective. They are totally different, but some people see them as one and the same, and they're not.
Yeah, I guess some people might mistakenly think of it as a penetration test light, right? So it's security light, LIT.
Yeah.
And the truth is, it really isn't a penetration test. It's much more lacking. Now, I think one of the reasons why people moved in that direction is it's cheaper. And it's cheaper because you don't have to have someone who is able to do that pivoting, who's able to do that post exploitation, or who is able to really grab a lot of data. You just need someone who's able to detect that there is an issue here and then point it out and move on. And it's also faster as a direct result. You get a lot less fixation. But the problem is it hides a lot of vulnerabilities because, as you know, many times in order to successfully pull off one vulnerability, you have to actually leverage another vulnerability. The vulnerabilities where it's just one thing are the ones that are usually the weakest. They do the least damage. It's the vulnerabilities where I'm chaining together, pulling together 2, 3, 4 different vulnerabilities into one ultimate vulnerability, so to speak, because I have to leverage those other ones in order to pull this one off to its full effect. You would not see those in a security assessment.
Right. No, I agree. So what are your thoughts about the risk assessment and versus vulnerability assessment?
So I think a lot of people are getting confused because, number one, they don't seem to understand what these things are supposed to be, and number two, they don't understand where they belong. So a risk assessment is quite simply where I go through and I look at your system and I say, okay, well, based on this data about your system, so it's a public application that has medical data and it interfaces with 3 separate customers, plus it has a web interface tied to it in addition to actual full-blown clients. It's custom code, blah, 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 blah. All right, so I take all of this and I put it together and I say, okay, well, your threat actors are nation states because it's medical data and they love to have that for a variety of reasons. It's going to be your hacktivists because some of your clients happen to be I don't know, logging companies, the military, um, police departments, whomsoever has people's ire these days. And it's also going to include all of these other groups, plus your lone wolves, basically people who are in their basement doing whatever, and they're eating pizza, overweight in their mom's basement. You got the image.
Yeah, with the hoodie.
Yeah, right. Smell of
Yeah.
Cheetos.
Yeah. I know those types.
People like that, right? So I've identified the kind of individuals who are likely to go after your system, and then I also look at it and I say, okay, well, you're also going to have issues from, because where your system happens to be located, flooding and tornadoes and hurricanes, because you're in the world's worst place and there's a volcano next door to. So all these bad things.
A volcano.
Volcano.
Really? Oh, they're messed up. Volcanoes. Yeah. Oh, they totally messed up.
That's right. So we put all this stuff together, and we say, based on this, these are your threats and these are your risks, right? So you've got a risk of this data loss, personally identifiable information known as PII getting stolen, medical data getting stolen. You put that all together, that is your risk assessment. So your risk assessment doesn't sit there and tell you what vulnerabilities you have. It doesn't tell you anything other in general, the kinds of things that you need to protect against, because you need to protect against people abusing the fact that you have an LDAP server, or you have this, or you have that. But there are no vulnerabilities identified. I'm not actually looking for any real vulnerabilities. I'm not doing any of that kind of stuff. Whereas your vulnerability assessment is going through and it's actually looking for, no kidding, real vulnerabilities. And people get confused because they don't understand what a risk is, and they don't understand what a vulnerability is, and they don't understand how this stuff works. And so, I mean, the one individual tried to, well, she did. She made me reclassify all my vulnerability assessments as risk assessments, and then later on, she blamed me.
So wait. Yeah, she of course she did that. But let's think about also something that you said: the difference between a flaw, a bug, a risk, a vulnerability. All right. Then somebody didn't know what they were talking about.
Somebody didn't know what they were talking about at all.
Yeah. It's and with all of these terms, people kind of get confused on what the hell they're talking about. Yeah. Which it'll be better if we didn't have too many freaking terms where they are what they are. The flaw, the bug, the vulnerabilities. I mean, come on now. Like, do we need all of these freaking terms? I mean, that's cool with the bugs. It's different. But I think it's just people kind of get confused on what they really are, which is why I said they need to know what the difference between a vulnerability assessment, a risk assessment, and a penetration test versus a security assessment. Kind of need to know those different things. They're all different.
They're very different.
All, yeah.
And interestingly enough, as we discussed before, our industry has not solidified these terms, period, anyway, in general. Now, there is a very distinct difference between a risk assessment and risks versus vulnerabilities. Now, flaws and vulnerabilities, though, that's actually not a solidly defined thing yet. Our industry, plenty of organizations, plenty of major security organizations do not recognize the concept of a flaw, because those that differentiate state that a flaw is a vulnerability that cannot be exploited. Not because you have mitigations in place, but because something's not hooked up or things of that nature. A flaw to some of those organizations is like if I wrote new code and it's not hooked up to anything yet, so no one can actually call it, and I have a vulnerability in it, right? So if we were to actually hook it up, you'd be destroyed. But the problem is, first and foremost, it doesn't make sense because that flaw is still a vulnerability and that code can still be called. I'll give you a good example. So I recently was looking at a system and I pointed out a deserialization issue that they had. So there are many different ways that you can have insecure deserialization. In this particular case, they were using the struts2 JSON plugin. Now, the way that plugin works is if I specify a variable that has a setter, unless you explicitly tell it to not deserialize, it will deserialize. If I have a variable that is public, it will deserialize. If I have a setter method or something that looks like a setter method, so maybe there's not even a variable tied to it. Maybe it's just a method that says set pizza, right? I like pizza, so pizza's going to come up in my examples.
Yeah, you use it for everything. It's okay. DaRon, the pizza man.
That's right. It's amazing. I wish I could eat it more.
I hear you.
I have to keep my beautiful figure.
I don't think that's going to do anything to your beautiful figure. I mean, I'm sure that you can eat whatever you want and you'll still be okay. Yeah. Yeah.
No enhancement here.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, there are other organizations that define flaws as being a broader, more overarching thing, and vulnerabilities to them are actually a kind of flaw. So some have it flaws are vulnerabilities, some have it vulnerabilities are flaws, and some have it flaws are things that can't be exploited because that thing is not reachable. But as I was saying, it's interesting because you can have, for example, deserialization issues or remote code execution or buffer overflows or a variety of different mechanisms that allows someone to call to things that you don't think are hooked up. And that's one of the important things is you'll have all these development teams and they'll write all this code and they'll remove maybe some of the public interfaces to or public methods or whatever it happens to be to actually access this defunct code. But that becomes moot when you actually start exploiting. Once I'm able to do anything where I can point to arbitrary code or arbitrary segments, I can bypass that. And that was one of the interesting things about this deserialization issue is because of the way the struts2 JSON deserializer works, I can feed it JSON that calls to things that you don't want it to call to. And I can call all the way down your stack. And I can actually even call to a bunch of static methods. I can call to whatever makes me happy. And that's not something that most people would realize that you could wind up doing. But this is thanks to the beauty of modern computing. We've done all of this work to create all of these parsers that will translate something into code or code into something. But unfortunately, our industry has done a very bad job securing it, which means that if you do have this defunct code, it can still be called. It can still be triggered. And that's why if you have code that you're not using and you don't plan on using, remove it. We have Git. We have Subversion. We have all of these modern source code repositories. Branch or stash or whatever makes you happy, but remove that code before you actually compile it for production. Anyway, all of this aside, I want to end with a question. Okay, so right now, you've done contracting, you've done corporate, and you've done consulting, right? Or have you not done consulting?
I haven't done contracting. I have done contracting, but not contracting from that essence. So
okay.
If you really want to be honest, it's been consulting and corporate security.
Okay. If you had to pick between one of the three that you will do for the rest of your career, which would you pick and why?
Could it be something I haven't done?
Yes. Yes.
I would say from just people I talk to and having a conversation with that I would prefer the contracting world. Just coming from the fact that I've done corporate security, did not really like it as much, and felt like I was stuck basically in it, and there was no room for growth. Consulting, there's a limit to like the sky's a limit of some of the things you can do and where you can go. However, again, the projects are not as steep or not as interesting as some of the contracts or projects you would get in a contracting perspective. I've heard about people who have big contracts doing contracting for the government or different stuff that are way more interesting than it is in the civilian world. So that is what I would love to do. As you know, researching vulnerabilities, doing more security research. But even then, if I was doing penetration testing, that's fine too. But it would be more things that you can get your hands on that you can't touch here.
Yeah.
As far as civilian wise, or from those perspectives. So unless there was some consulting that was done for the government, which we know are not as not as exciting as the contracting world.
Right.
But that's where I would go if I had the opportunity, or sometime in the future. That's where I look forward to working at eventually.
Well, I definitely will tell you the government side is the much more interesting side, especially if you are good at what you do, because then you get really amazing projects.
And that's what I'm interested in. And I'm interested in really, really amazing things, because it also it makes me wonder. It also helps me. It also will just help my curiosity. It'll basically allow me to do some of the things or find things that I'm interested in finding. Like, they're going to be the same vulnerability, same stuff, but it's different coming from different things you've never touched.
Yeah.
Okay. And the situation and scenarios are different. The data there is different. So that's what I would love to do.
Fantastic. Well, with that, we're going to leave off this episode, and I want to thank you all for watching. How do we end this?
Until the next time, don't forget to subscribe to the Roniel and DaRon podcast show, and catch you the next episode. And until the next time, signing off, I'm Roniel.
I'm DaRon.
Have a good one.
Have fun.
And why did you sound like one of those sex phone operators? Or I'm sorry. It was like, welcome to the Roniel and DaRon show. Oh, Jesus. Excuse me. Sorry. It just was, wow.
Hello, everyone.
Right. Nice voice. Were you a phone operator in your past?
That's how I got through college.
What is it? A gigolo?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, that movie was actually pretty funny, but yeah.
Shake.
Sorry, I had to comment on that, man. That voice was just, woo.
We're gonna have to keep it now because it's funny.
Yeah, no, it's good. Good voice. Nice voice. I just didn't know you had it in you.
Actually, my voice is much deeper and it sounds much nicer than what I usually do. But I think I maybe mentioned once before, it shocks a lot of people and I get a lot of comments. So I bring it up higher, which is uncomfortable and strains it after a little bit. So that's what it does.
So when you talk deep, have you ever talked deep with a client and then they were just like, well, what? Who is this? Like, I don't remember you talking like this.
I have had people just be completely like, what the fuck?
Hey, that's a good voice, especially since your name is DaRon.
Yeah, that's right.
Hint. Nice one.
Wow, you're just not flowing today.
Oh no, I was just waiting on the actual question exactly. But okay,
It's wide open,
I'm
man.